Hello, welcome to what is a new channel and my first episode and the first episode. And what I want to talk about is really about men. And if you imagine the scene, or specifically, let me just talk about a few weeks ago, months, I went to the theater to watch Mrs Doubtfire. And if you don't know, the plot of Mrs Doubtfire, at least the theater performance, is actually very simple. A couple are together with two kids, and then what happens is that the woman decides that the man is not pulling his weight, and therefore she asks him to leave. And so, after a long marriage with two kids, he has to leave. Let me turn off my phone that's buzzing away. And then, after he leaves, he moves into accommodation, which is ideally not suitable. And then issues arise about whether or not he's able to host the children, or that the children could stay over because, he's not in the house anymore. She stays in the house, eventually finds herself another lover, and then, or a new boyfriend, and in the end, he has to apologize for by not being a good husband, he has to apologize for that. And in the plot of it, he apologizes. And at the end, they're all happily together, including her and her new man. And any pity, as it's presented, is supposed to be for her and not for him. And that is something that I really have difficulty with, because if you imagine that you're in a relationship with someone, with your wife for 20 years or so, I mean, it can be shorter, it doesn't matter. And then what happens is that out of the blue, she comes to you and she says, "You know what, darling? I love you, but I'm not in love with you anymore. I don't want to be in this relationship anymore." So you would think that in that situation, if you don't want to be in the relationship anymore, you should just up sticks and go. But it doesn't work like that. What happens is that he has to leave the house and not be there with his kids anymore. So if you are leaving, you're still expected to pay towards the house, the matrimonial home, until all the finances are sorted out. And at the same time, you're supposed to be able to afford to find somewhere to live. Now, if you're lucky enough, you might have your old bedroom at your parents' to return to, which certainly reminds you of your teenage years, as teenage boy years. And then what happens is that she stays in the house, and you don't have enough suitable accommodation for you to host the children. There's questions about your attitude, your behavior. But in a sense, decisions come with consequences. So her decision, the person who suffers the consequence is him. She suffers no consequence at all. And then she goes on and has a man who's now in his house with his children. Now that just seems really unfair, because what the system does is that the system goes on the presumption that the kids are better off with the woman. It's really interesting that in these days of feminism, that you would think that if there's feminism, then you can then conclude that a husband and a wife are equally capable of having the children live with them, and therefore you should assess what's best. And then, but that's not how it happens. The law as it stands, or at least judges, are in favor, I would say generally, of the women. I mean, the only exception to that is when you then have maybe a teenage boy, where it is thought that it's perhaps more suitable for that boy to live with the father rather than the mother. But really, the whole family is changed, everything is changed, and the man is the one that takes the blame. Now, what the system doesn't take into account is that really that ending of that relationship through no action by him. And obviously, I'm not making any defense for anybody if it was a situation whereby somebody had engaged in some form of violence then yeah, I have no sympathy for you. But in a situation where someone has decided, look, sorry, I don't fancy you anymore. So, in a sense, if you take it from the male perspective, what you've done is that you've invested a lot of money and a lot of time, a lot of attention in building a family, in providing the family, and in this period of time, it's almost like, sorry, that's not for anything, that's for nothing. And you can be sure that if you are, in a sense, the absent parent, your relationship with your children is not going to be ideal. There's a big difference between living with your child and building that relationship and being somebody that sees your child every 2 weeks or so. But moreover, you then are in this position where you have to build again. So you can be pretty sure that what's going to happen is that the house is going to be given to her, because the system is going to say, well, she needs somewhere for the kids to live. That's what it has to be. And the other thing is that within the whole system is also, you have the issues about where sometimes men are reluctant to move out, because if you don't move out, what happens is that if whoever stays in the house, typically the woman, what happens is that a court would normally say, you know what, let's leave, the children should have stability, which I perfectly understand. So there shouldn't be anything about them moving somewhere else or whatever. It's better to just leave them where they are. But obviously we know that the kids are significantly affected about what's happening at that time. Yes, their wishes are taken into account. But really, when you are, that very much depends on your age, but when you are particularly young, your views, your feelings and wishes don't really matter at all. The system is going to decide for you. And if you decide to fight it and you end up in court, it's going to be a stranger that you do not know, who's never met your children, who decides what happens. But we know for a long time the system favors the women. But from the male point of view, you are at that particular point, it is really a very difficult thing to stomach. You're going through a series of emotions. Your life, which at one point seemed to be on track, is now no longer on track. How do you pick yourself up? How do you avoid being bitter? How do you trust another woman in a relationship? Would you ever want to marry again? Because really, all those things are really very difficult for you. And what happens is that in any settlement, you're going to lose your pension. You're definitely going to lose part of your pension. But you know that the largest share of those resources are going to go to the woman, because the other thing is that it's thought that obviously if somebody is caring for the children, then it means that they will have less earning capacity. Well, bear in mind the stats show that women are more likely to go to university. More women definitely are going to university than men. I saw a stat the other day saying there are more women in the medical profession than men. And so, I'm talking doctors. We know nurses is obviously women. So that seems to very old-fashioned kind of thing. And really it's about how do you manage in that situation when you're having to deal with all these things that are going on at the moment or at that time. So some people would say to you, all right, you just have to man up. You just have to sort it out. You have to deal with it. You're going through a crisis. You're thinking, well, who should I talk to? Who should I not talk to? And if you wallow in self-pity for a little while, I perfectly understand. But at the end of the day, society expects you to pick yourself up. And I think generally as men, I think that point is fair. But I think the treatment of men, or the favoritism in favor of women, is something that is problematic. But really, when you've got these problems, the question is, what are you going to do? How can you resolve it? What are the things that you should be looking at? And the thing about it is that in that situation, when somebody says, and it's a kind way to say, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. It's really, and when you're at age of 40s or 50s, it's particularly difficult. You've got less of your earning years ahead of you, and you spend so much time and effort acquiring things. So in terms of coming home, instead of coming home and you see the children or the wife, you're actually going home to a flat or apartment somewhere, if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you'll end up in a room in a shared house somewhere. And obviously, shared housing, it tends to be younger people, and try be somebody in their 50s trying to get shared accommodation with younger people who don't want somebody who's like their dad living with them is really problematic. Or maybe some tiny studio paying some exorbitant amount, and at the same time you're meant to be working and earning money. Incredibly difficult. So what this podcast aims to do is tell the stories about what are happening to people. So in that sense, I would ask people who are listening to send in their stories, but I will be getting other stories that I will share. I have a lot of stories to share, but also at the same time talking about how to move forward, how to get on with your life. And what I will say on here, what other people will say on here, it's also supposed to be of benefit to other people who think the divorce might be in the horizon. To learn how to manage that, to learn how to make good decisions, to learn how to protect yourself. Because at the end of the day, you can start out with a certain amount of idealism, but the truth of the matter is that marriage, in a sense, it's a contract, but not a contract that you see the rules for before a breakdown comes. But also, even if you have an agreement, a prenup to protect for that, it doesn't mean that it's going to be accepted, because it all depends on a whole load of factors. There are some who say, well, you know what, I don't, men shouldn't get married. But I think that the desire to have a woman or to bond with somebody, to want to have children, all these kind of things, is perfectly understandable. And I think rather than say to people, oh, don't do it, it's a terrible thing, don't do it, I think we need to talk about how you can do it in the best way possible. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to be successful, but in my view, you can positively take steps to help yourself, but at the same time you can take steps to protect yourself if what happens is that the relationship is going to break down. So I'm interested in stories about what's happening to you, what has happened to you, because I think in this space that is specifically designed for men, the views that you have, I can help and we can help each other. I have put in the description a link to a Telegram channel where I would welcome people to join me on there, in addition to subscribing to this channel. And let's see what we can do to put men in a better position, to be wiser, to seek support in difficult circumstances, and really to get away from what in a sense is a media influence that is designed to present things a particular way. I mean, I guess in some ways it's like the Matrix. Do you want the red pill or do you want the blue pill? But I don't do it intending to be harsh. In the end, people have to do what they think is best for them, but I believe in people getting information. So for today, I will stop for now. There's more exciting and interesting content that's ahead. And once again, your suggestions and ideas will be most welcome. Join me, as I've said, in the Telegram channel, and we'll go on from there. Goodbye for now.